hello, check, hello, check, hello, check, hello, 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 check, 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 hello, check, hello, hello, check, 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 hello,
So we are starting with the session. I request everyone to please take their seats. I request everyone to kindly take their seats. A very good morning to distinguished guests, participants, faculty members, and dear students. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the Pre-Colloquium Research Workshop co-hosted by the Karnataka University in collaboration with ICUN Academy of Environmental Law and Gujarat National Law University. We are deeply grateful to the ICUN Academy of Environmental Law and GNLU for giving us the privilege to organize the Pre-Colloquium Research Workshop. This opportunity signifies a significant step towards advancing environmental research and fostering meaningful dialogue on conservation issues. With the support and collaboration of ICUN Academy of Environmental Law and GNLU, we are empowered to engage scholars, experts, and practitioners in exploring innovative solutions and enhancing a collective understanding of environmental challenges. As we convene here today, we are reminded of the critical role that IUCN played in the global conservation community. Created in 1948, IUCN is now the world's largest and most diverse environmental network, harnessing the knowledge, resources, and reach of more than 1,400 member organizations and 16,000 experts. Here is the short video of IUCN.
How much do you love nature? Do you remember your first walk in a forest? Your first swim in the ocean? The first time you saw a wild animal? We all love nature. We all depend on nature. More than 40% of the world's oxygen comes from rainforests. 50% of chemical medicines are based on nature. 100% of our food comes from nature. Are we taking this for granted? We need nature to sustain us. IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, is the world's largest global environmental network created in 1948. Together, we're working in more than 160 countries for a just world that values and conserves nature. With over 1,000 staff, more than 1,200 member organizations, including governments and NGOs, and almost 11,000 volunteer scientists and experts. Together, we gather the latest knowledge on biodiversity, assessing the status of species, and protecting our natural wonders. We run hundreds of field projects around the world, such as managing water resources, restoring forests, protecting our coasts and oceans, and helping companies improve their environmental performance. We are nature's voice on the international stage, at the IUCN World Conservation Congress, at the United Nations General Assembly, at international environmental negotiations. By investing in solutions offered by nature, we can address today's global challenges. Together, we can stop the extinction of plants and animals, help fight climate change, restore natural resources, boost food security, and reduce poverty. When nature is healthy, our communities, economies, and countries prosper. Together, let's stand up for nature to create a better future for all of us. Join us now.
A huge round of applause for IUCN for these extraordinary efforts and initiatives. May I now request Professor Dr. P. Lakshmi, Ma'am, Dean, United World School of Law, for the welcome gathering.
Good morning, everyone. It's my distinct honor to welcome all the dignitaries and each and every one of you present here to the pre-colloquium research workshop of the 21st Annual Colloquium of the IUCN Academy of Environmental Law. Today marks a significant day in the history of United World School of Law at Karnataka University. We are extremely grateful to the IUCN Academy of Environmental Law and Gujarat National Law University for giving us this opportunity to host this gathering of brilliant minds and passionate advocates dedicated to advancing the field of environmental law. Our special thanks to Mr. William and Tina for approving our proposal to organize this pre-colloquium at Karnataka University. I'm happy to share that our students, through the Center for Research on Environmental Studies at Karnataka University, are working towards creating environmental awareness among different sections of the society and stakeholders through various programs. The center has adopted 2 nearby villages and has organized several outreach programs and awareness campaigns. And I'm sure this pre-colloquium will serve as a motivation for our students to work more towards the protection of the environment. I wish you all a productive and inspiring workshop. May our efforts here today contribute to a brighter, more sustainable future for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Ma'am. May I now request all the dignitaries to come upon the stage for lighting of the lamp.
या कुन्देन्दु तुषारहारधवला या शुभ्रवस्त्रावृता या वीणावरदण्डमण्डिता ब्रह्माच्युतशङ्कर प्रभृतिभिः देवै सदा वन्दिता सा मां पातु सरस्वती भगवती निःशेषजाड्यापहा शुक्लां ब्रह्मविचारसारपरमाम् आद्यां जगद्व्यापिनीं वीणापुस्तकधारिणीमभयदाम् जाड्यान्धकारापहा हस्ते स्फाटिकमालिकां विदधतीं पद्मासने संस्थितां वन्दे तां परमेश्वरीं भगवतीं बुद्धिप्रदां शारदाम्
Hello. Yeah. Now I would request Dr. Tariq Ali Sayyed Sir, Registrar, Karnavati University, to felicitate Professor Dr. William. I now request Professor Dr. P. Lakshmi Ma'am to felicitate Dr. Tina Maria. I would request Dr. Kishore Sir to felicitate Mr. Robert Percival. I request Dr. Aseem Chandra Paliwal to felicitate Mr. Seming Yang. I request Professor Dr. Ramnivas Sharma to felicitate Mr. Gustav. I request Dr. Nityanand Jha to felicitate Dr. Siva Bharati. May I now request Professor Dr. Tina Maria to deliver the opening remarks.
Dear participants of our event, dear Kanavati University host and dear Gujarat National Law University host, in the capacity of ICUN Academy of Environmental Law, Chair of the Governing Board, I would like to offer my warmest thanks for having us here today. Being here in India to have our colloquium with you is a long dream. It has been a long dream for us. The whole time I have been involved in the academy, we have always had this discussion that if only we could have the colloquium held in India. And now that takes place. It means that the thanks from our side come from the bottom of my heart. It is a long dream, and we are now able to share the colloquium experience with you. Thank you. I would also like to extend my thanks to Professor Shantakumar, who unfortunately cannot be with us today. He is also a member of our board and the one who was applying to have the conference here. We would love to have him here. We are very grateful of him taking the initiative and inviting the event here to India. We have had our annual colloquium across the world, and there's a reason to it. We are a global organization, as we saw in the introductory video, in line with the broader mothership of IUCN. And there's a reason to that. To be present, to be able to listen and learn from all the regions of the world is of immense value when we are together tackling the challenges we face with climate change, with environmental degradation, with biodiversity loss. Everybody is needed. Those problems can be solved, but only together. It means that I am most excited to start this workshop day together with you to learn more about the realities, the problems, and the solutions that have been developed in this region. Because only through that mutual learning we are able to create the solutions that are so darkly needed. So, once more, thank you for having us, and look forward to having the best week of the year, as I always call the Colloquium Week.
Thank you, ma'am. May I now request Professor Dr. William to deliver his special address.
Greetings, Academy scholars. Greetings, Karnavati University. It is so nice to be here. What a welcome we received from you. Thank you so very much. Of course, we are here for the Teaching and Capacity Building workshop, and I think it's particularly important, and I've never seen such a wonderful student turnout for this event. This is really a fantastic program that we've put together. When I say we, I mean particularly the Teaching Capacity Building Board. They have put this event together. You're going to hear some great speakers. But I am just so excited because what we do is we talk amongst ourselves, professors often, about how we can build capacity, how we can teach environmental law better. But I had the pleasure to speak with your dean before we started today, and she explained to me that the students at Kanavati actually go out into the field and are teaching themselves. They're teaching folks in villages about the importance of environmental law. So when I heard that, I thought, well, what a fantastic event to have here and to have so many students present. Hopefully you'll be inspired to do more in that regard, to use your creativity. I see you all have the same uniform, but I know you do not all have the same imagination, the same brain, the same heart. And I encourage you to use your heart, use your creativity to spread capacity in India and beyond once you become attorneys. So because we have such a great turnout of students, I really have to get a picture of you all. And so what I'd like you to do is when I take this picture, use your creativity, put your hands in the air, do something so I can really get a picture and a flavor of how you guys are all here today. Please, come on, raise your hands. Let's hear it for the students. Yeah, yeah. Thank you all so very much for attending. And Academy Scholars, of course, thank you for your contributions, not just for today, but for the entire colloquium. And again, thank you, Karnavati University, for hosting us, and thank you to Gujarat National Law University for hosting this colloquium. We obviously couldn't do this without all the work, and so much of the work is done by students, I would add. So again, thank you all very much for such a wonderful opening to our colloquium.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words. We are glad that you liked it. May I kindly request Dr. Shal Marimuthu to address the gathering and moderate the session.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by first thanking the organizers, the GLU, Professor Santa Kumar, and also the co-host, University of Karnavati, Professor P. Lakshmi, for this event. Now, I should say namaste, vanakkam, and good morning to all of you. And I'd like to thank all your presenters who are here and also all the participants who have come to join us to listen to what we have to say today about the teaching and capacity building. We are gathered here today to explore a vital topic that is more relevant today than it is ever before. And today the workshop, the teaching and capacity workshop, will explore the importance of eco-pedagogy in legal education. What I'm going to do now is to briefly tell you what is eco-pedagogy and what the key themes and goals of the teaching workshop will deliver to you today. So why we are here today is because we want to learn how we can incorporate environmental perspective into legal studies. And we will explore the intersectionality of eco-pedagogy in legal education. We will also discuss how we can enhance community resilience through legal education, and how we can promote climate change consciousness within the classroom setting. So these are the topics that our presenters will be talking to you today. Now you may want to know what is eco-pedagogy is all about, because I have mentioned this word a couple of times. Now I will not take it for granted that all of you know about it. So I will explain to you what eco-pedagogy means. Now it means us creating this awareness, this environmental awareness, this consciousness when we learn or when we deliver the environmental studies. So that's what it is all about. Now through our collective efforts, we can now transform the legal education to meet the demands of the changing world. So let's use this workshop as a platform to exchange ideas, to inspire each other, and to also create a meaningful change for a better future. Now I will kickstart this presentation with my topic, and then it will be followed by two other presenters who are seated there, and then we will have the online presentations on those topics. Thank you. My topic of presentation is about the role of legal education in community building. I'm going to draw lessons from two movies. They are Erin Brockovich and Windfall. Erin Brockovich is an inspiring story about a paralegal assistant that was fighting corporate collusions. And this movie highlights the community empowerment through legal action. This movie also emphasizes the importance of community resilience and justice. And it demonstrates the law as a tool for good beyond classroom. The next movie there is called The Windfall. Now, Windfall focuses on a town's struggle with wind farm installations. It highlights the legal battles and the community health concerns. Now, this movie is an old movie, but it reveals the complexity of renewable energy projects. Like these movies, my presentation will explore the necessity and the methods for harnessing legal education for a positive impact. Now, I will use solar, wind, and hydro as a case study. And I will offer some discussions and suggestions for implementation. So it's all about how we can expand the role of legal education beyond traditional teaching to drive a positive impact. Now let me begin with this slide. I want to talk about a guideline that was developed by UNESCO to enhance educational qualities for teachers' capacity building. Now, in this particular article, there are many articles. In this particular one, it talks about strengthening teachers' capacity. What do we really need, or what do we really mean by capacity building? Now, it highlights 4 important points. First, it emphasizes practical relevance of the teaching materials. Second, it tells us that any innovations that we make must be fit for purpose. And thirdly, it talks about the scope for assessing the effectiveness of that innovation. And lastly, we must have the supporting structure, having adequate support system to deliver those type of teaching. So these are the critical points of the guidelines which you will see throughout my presentation when I'm talking about it. Now my next slide is on multidisciplinary approach, because what we need to consider also is adapting a multidisciplinary framework mindset in order for us to effectively apply the eco-pedagogy approach. So eco-pedagogy, as I told you all earlier, or explained earlier, it's about integrating the principles of awareness, the awareness of sustainability, the awareness of climate change into all our legal studies. Right? And this particular model that I'm talking about aligns with the UNESCO's recommendations that emphasizes innovative and practical teaching methods. Right? And this will align with the global education standards that we should aspire to. Now I'm going to talk about the example. All right? So New South Wales is the state in Australia, and I come from New South Wales. And I come from a little town called Armidale and Uralla. So New South Wales has taken this commitment to net zero by 2050. To do that, it has got certain infrastructure conversion taking place in New South Wales. One of it is the shift from fossil fuel to renewable energy, solar, wind, and hydro. Now, in this project, it also includes building substations, battery storage, and new transmission lines. Now, we know solar farms is a sustainable solution. It provides for a cleaner alternatives to fossil fuels, and it will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But it has come with a challenge for the farmers, because there's going to be a significant land use implications. What is happening in New South Wales, in the part where we come from, Uralla and Armidale, the solar farms are replacing fertile farmland. Now this is having an impact on food productions. All right? Now, in order for me to explain the practical relevance that UNESCO guidelines talks about, I need to go into the approval process system. So bear with me, I'm going to go through that for a while. The approval system is guided by a number of laws. So you have got the New South Wales Environmental Protection Assessment Act. It's also regulated by the Electricity Infrastructure Investment Act, and also to some extent it involves the Commonwealth Environmental Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act. Just to give you a quick rundown as to what is the location that I'm talking about. So if you look at there, that's New South Wales, and that's Armidale, that's our UNS, University of New England. That area, a lot of farmers have got land, and they produce a lot of cattle and sheep for food, basically. All right? So now I'm just going to quickly go through the process that is involved in the renewable energy development. Now, they are basically can be summarized into 4 major steps. You have the first stage, as we call it, as the developer's proposals. The developer will submit a proposal for the renewable project, and this is managed by the state government approval process. Now, the first stage is you have a land agreement. So they enter into a land agreement with the host landowners, which we call it as the host and neighbor lease arrangements. Now, once this is done, they will do a scoping. Now, once they've done a scoping, this is where they will submit a scoping report to the New South Wales government for approval. Once that is done, the government will issue a report detailing environmental assessment requirements. In the coming slides, I'll tell you how much of assessments that they will have to do before they could kickstart this project. This environmental impact assessment, in this assessment, the community is only given 28 days for them to make a submission. And only if there are 50 members raise objections will it then be referred to an independent planning commission. All right? Now let me tell you what are the kind of assessments that they will look at. So this is only a short list of assessment, but there are a lot more than this that is involved. So the first thing that they will do is they will do a community consultation, which means they will talk to the local communities in their decision-making processes. Then they will conduct some environmental studies, and this would be assessing the waste management, assessing the biodiversity, and also the ecological impacts. They will also carry out a social impact assessments, meaning they will look at the effects that it will have in the communities. They'll do an agriculture assessment, economic assessment, visual amenity investigations, meaning they will look to see what changes that solar, hydro, and all of that is going to have on the landscapes. They will do a noise and air assessment and heaps of assessments. All right? It's not an easy task. Now, once they have done this in the Urala area, they will look to see what sort of feedback that we are getting. So the community there has given a varied response to this. Some are supporting the view for the renewable energy to be brought in. Some are opposing. The ones who are supporting, it's because when they sign a lease agreement to lease the land to the developer, they will be paid certain compensation. They will have a lease payment paid to them for several years, 10 to 15 years. The ones who are opposing these views, the neighboring landowners are concerned about the devaluation of their land because they do not believe that it is going to enhance the value of the property. So they have got mixed concerns about this project. Now, this project has got some upsides and downsides. If you look at the upsides, it will boost the local businesses that comes in because there's a lot of construction works that will happen, and therefore that little town will have a lot of businesses. It will increase employment opportunity during the construction, and there will be economic benefits that will come to them. But it is not without downsides, all right? The downsides, the main one that the community is concerned about, is that it is an irreversible landscape changes. It's a long-term alteration to the land use. It will have a significant impact on the environment. There are also communities getting into a coercion because there is a clause called the confidentiality clause in that. So they cannot share, they can't talk to the neighbors about it. So this is also happening there. There's also lack of transparency. There's impact on the environment and agricultural lands. There's also an economic concern. What happens after the 15th year when the project is finished? What happens to the people there? Everyone will finish work and pack their bags and go and leave panels and panels there for them. So they are not happy about that. Waste management challenges. We don't know what we are going to do with those blades. We still haven't discovered where we're going to dispose it. We can't dispose it at the moment. We don't know. So these are some of the concerns that they have raised. Now the concern for all of us is also that it is affecting our food security. What is happening is we have got two green technologies. We are wanting solar, renewable energies transferred to or taken away from the prime land agriculture. So it's two green industries. It's a complex issue for us to deal with. The proposed renewal projects have targeted prime agricultural land, which is going to be affecting our food security. All right? Quickly to talk to you about the state where we are when we talk about food security. When you look at the Global Food Security Index, Australia ranks at number 22. Quite comfortable. We have got a moderate food security. But if you really look at it, we cannot say Australia is comfortable because it does only have a moderate food security, because food security is a global food security. We produce for others, others depend on us. So you cannot look at food security in isolation. But renewable energy that's targeting the prime agricultural land is affecting food security. And this particular area has been producing food for centuries. I give you an example of another key finding, which is from the Global Risk Perception Survey. Now, this survey has targeted or has provided us with top risk, and it has got energy supply as risk, cost of living as risk, but it also has got food supply crisis as a risk of our future. Now, they have highlighted it as one of those that is having a greatest potential global impact. Okay. Now, I've given you a brief introduction about the renewable energy projects, how it's impacting a community in New South Wales, and how it is in conflict. One green technology is in conflict with another green. What is being affected is our food security. This is one issue that has such a large impact and implications. Are we teaching our students with an awareness of how broad these impacts are? Do your students know about this connection that I've just made? Are you aware of this? I just want to ask you all behind there. Are you all aware of this connection? Does your syllabus include this sort of thinking for you? This is what I'm talking about here. So, what I've just spoke to you is a multidisciplinary input in a renewable energy project. Can law be taught in isolation now? If you really look at it, it now covers legal aspects, it covers mediation, public relations, community consultations, property valuations, economic assessments, hydrology and environmental assessment, social impacts, and a few other areas. So law cannot stand alone, cannot be done in isolation. This is a practical example of that. So how are we going to achieve this? What do we need to do to change our mindsets? This is where we look at eco-pedagogy approach, an approach that has to build in the environmental awareness and consciousness, the impacts, the implications of all that affects the environment. We will need a comprehensive interdisciplinary curriculum. We need to work with the other disciplines. We need to have an environmental law research projects or research groups in every discipline, in every area, in every university. We need to work like that. Only then we will be able to address or have a holistic solution to the problems that are coming about. We need to identify practical case studies in our community that needs help with those kind of issues. This is what we need to do. Now, these approaches are not without any challenges. We have to face a lot of challenges. One of the challenges, or one of the primary challenges, is the lack of awareness and understanding, the limited knowledge among our legal scholars about the eco-pedagogy approach, the resistance to change. Our traditional legal education institutions are resistant to new approaches. This is something that we will have to do now in order to have the future that we want. Resource limitations. We always have to manage resources. That's something, we always don't have enough resources. That's because we are not managing our resources well. Conflict with existing standards. We are stuck with the old standards. We need to look at it a little bit more differently. We have to have a broader thinking about all of this. So, even the perception that we have about eco-pedagogy, they are viewed as a niche rather than an essential component of a legal education. So that mindset will also have to change. Now, in order for us to have a community resilience, we need to look at the eco-pedagogical approach to legal education. We need to engage, we need to involve our students in hands-on environmental projects, provide them with practical experience and skills that will take them very far in their lives. We have to encourage and promote research into local environmental issues, get them involved, partner with local organizations on environmental initiatives, and few other ideas that we can come up with. Now, the lessons that we learn from movies stays in us sometimes. Some movies carries a beautiful message, and it should get you thinking about the future of our environment. And the lesson I learned from Erin Brockovich and Winfall is that law is a tool for community empowerment and resilience, and addressing environmental and social challenges through legal action. We need to equip our legal professionals with the necessary skills and also the perspectives. And this approach, and what I just spoke to you, aligns with the UNESCO guidelines for teaching capacity building, where we incorporate practical relevance into capacity building. Now, these are the references that I've looked at, so I'm just putting it up there for you. That's it. That's a... Does anyone have any questions, or we deal with questions a little bit later? We've got a few more presenters. Our second presenter Dr. Durgesh Sri Raman, and she's going to present to us on this topic called Creating Climate Change Consciousness in the Classroom.
Thank you, Shah. Namaste, Gandhinagar. Thank you for hosting us and for a very sweet and warm welcome. I think we are all touched, and it's been quite emotional for me personally. So thank you for your kindness and your generosity and your huge hospitality. So thank you. Very happy to be here. Tena koutou, tena koutou, tena koutou katoa. I'm Dr. Durgesh Raman from Te Perenga Faculty of Law, the University of Waikato in New Zealand. And my topic for today's presentation is creating climate consciousness in the classrooms using the Smith and Fonterra case. Now, the Smith and Fonterra case was delivered by the New Zealand Supreme Court, which made headlines not just in New Zealand, but around the world, as it is the first climate litigation case which has tried to address the impact of climate change using actions based on common law's tort law. And since I am from New Zealand, it was only fitting that I discuss this case in this teaching workshop. So this litigation has been brought by Mr. Smith against 7 big New Zealand-based companies, including our largest dairy exporter, Fonterra. So who is Mr. Smith and why these companies? So Mr. Smith is an indigenous Maori, and he is an elder in the community called a Kaumatua, which is very much similar to a member of the Panchayat in India. This means that Mr. Smith is held in very high esteem by his community members, and he is also a climate change spokesperson for the National Forum of Tribal Leaders called Iwi Cheers Forum. So he brought a climate change litigation against these 7 companies on the basis that each is involved in an industry that either emits greenhouse gas emissions or supplies products when utilized that produces greenhouse gas emissions, to the extent that they are collectively responsible for 1/3 of all the gasehouse green emissions in New Zealand. That's 7 companies contributing 1/3 of New Zealand's total gasehouse green emissions. Hence, their material contribution to the climate crisis, which has damaged and will continue to damage, as Mr. Smith claims, his environment, that is, his land, the sea, including places of customary, cultural, historical, nutritional, and spiritual significance to him and his wider family. So what is Mr. Smith's case based on? It's essentially based on 3 causes of action in tort, namely public nuisance, negligence, and he has also proposed a new tort law which is called climate change damage tort. And it is alleged that this tort law, imposes a duty on these companies to cease materially contributing to damage to the climate system, dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system, and the adverse effects of climate change through emissions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. But what Mr. Smith is also sought, which is quite novel, is that these causes of actions be formed by what is called tikanga Maori. And tikanga Maori are the customary values and principles of the indigenous populations of New Zealand. Because according to tikanga Maori, a person's environment is an extension of the self. So so the environment is not different from the person. The person is part of the environment, and the environment is part of the person. So when there is any harm to the environment, it is harm to that person as well. And so for the public nuisance argument, Mr. Smith has relied on the adverse impacts of climate change affecting his rights, as well as public rights, such as the right to health, the right to safety, comfort, peace, a habitable environment, and so forth. and that the companies either knew or ought to have known that their actions were contributing to climate change and they should reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. For the negligence argument, Mr. Smith's argument is that these companies owe him and people like him a duty not to contribute to the greenhouse gas emissions, and that either they knew or ought to have known that their actions were dangerously interfering with the climate system, and that they breached their duty by continuing to materially harm him. And on the new proposed climate system damage, Mr. Smith has alleged that the company owe a duty to cease those materially contributing emissions and causing dangerous interference again with the climate system, and that they have either breached their duty by continuing to emit those greenhouse gas emissions, which the knowledge that it adversely affects the climate and causing injury to him and people like him. So on those bases, on either of those three grounds of actions based on tort law, if successful, Mr. Smith has sought two remedies. One is a declaration that the companies have either individually or collectively breached a duty of care owed to him, or caused or contributed to a public nuisance, or have caused him loss through their activities. The second is that there be injunctions imposed on these companies that would require these companies to peak their emissions by 2025 and then gradually reducing their emissions to ensure that they do reach zero net emissions by 2050. And if that's, or in the alternative, that the court can require them to immediately cease emissions, which is more ambitious than the first proposed injunction, of course. Now, the respondent's case, which is the companies, their case is that these claims essentially invite a judicial criticism of the statutory framework of New Zealand. Now, I should talk about the separation of powers in New Zealand. The judiciary is very independent from the government and parliament, so the judiciary in New Zealand do not interfere with what the parliament does, because in New Zealand, parliament is the supreme lawmaking body, and there is no such thing as judicial activism in New Zealand as there is in India. That's the first point. Secondly, the argument is that these are complex policy matters that are best left to Parliament to address. Third, the argument was that there are no reasonably arguable cause of actions, that these claims are far-fetched, and there is no link that their emissions are directly causing harm to Mr. Smith. Therefore, there was evidence that each of these companies are emitting within the legal framework, which was not disputed by Mr. Smith. Therefore, the argument is that the case should be struck out. So the cases reached the Supreme Court. Now, in the High Court, I don't want to go into details of what the High Court did say, but for the actions based on public nuisance and negligence, these were struck out because they were held not to be reasonably arguable. Basically, that Mr. Smith did not argue a particular harm, and there was no way of showing that the emissions of these companies were causing him harm. But the High Court declined to strike out the proposed climate change system damage tort on the basis that this was a novel argument and that the parties do need to be able to given an opportunity to argue their side in a hearing. So both Mr. Smith appealed and the respondent companies cross-appealed. It went to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal's approach was basically centered along these lines, that the magnitude of the crisis simply cannot appropriately or adequately be addressed by common law tort claims pursued through the courts. It is quintessentially a matter that calls for a sophisticated regulatory response at a national level supported by international coordination. Basically, the judge is saying this is not our place to interfere with the legal framework. In relation to the new tort, it stated that bare assertion of existence of a new tort without any attempt to delineate its scope was insufficient. And in saying that, it struck out all three causes of action and then Mr. Smith appealed to the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court took the case step by step. It referred to the recent science, the recent IPCC reports regarding damages to people, the environment, and it also referred to the future projections related to climate change. It also looked at the international and national legal responses to climate change, basically looking at the United Nations Framework on Climate Litigation, the Paris Agreement, and our statutory framework, and also referred to our ambitions regarding the climate change reductions to basically reach zero emissions by 2025. Now, the Supreme Court decision is basically has come to 4 key points. That the actionable public rights pleaded are tenable. So the court has acknowledged that, yes, there are public rights involved, such as right to the environment, to right to peace, right to health. Those are not disputed. So the arguments are tenable. It also said that you don't need the act or omission to be independently illegal to successfully raise a cause of action in tort. So basically, because the respondent company's case was that we are emitting within the legal framework, so what's the problem? So the Supreme Court said, to raise a tort-based action, you don't need the action to be illegal. You can still bring a case based on tort. However, the Supreme Court also stated that whether or not special damage, in other sense, that any damage that Mr. Smith may claim was over and above that what other members of the public were generally experiencing, is required, whether or not is required, is something that needs further consideration. So the Supreme Court has not answered the question whether Mr. Smith needs to plead special damages. So yes, there are arguments that indigenous and minority group people do experience climate change related impact more than other members of the public generally, but the Supreme Court hasn't said whether they need to argue special damage. So that question has left open-ended. But said that as far as causation is concerned, the Supreme Court was satisfied that there was a connection between the actions of the companies and the harm to public rights. So what does that mean? So the Supreme Court was not convinced that common law is incapable of addressing tortious aspects of climate change. Also, but it warned the appellant, or Mr. Smith, that the actions or omissions must amount to substantial and unreasonable interference with public rights, and warned that that is a very high threshold to reach. In saying that, it was of the view that common law must develop on the fertile fields of a trial, not on the barren rocks of a strike-out application. So Mr. Smith has a right to a trial where he can make an argument based on the grounds that he is alleging. But it also stated that Mr. Smith's prospects of success will depend on the quality of evidence, including tikanga-based evidence or custom-based evidence, where he is able to prove that there is harm from climate change that these companies are contributing to. So it hasn't said, we don't know whether the case is going to be successful or not, but it has gone back to the High Court to go for a trial. Now, so how can we use this case in the classroom to create climate consciousness? So the Smith and Fonterra case can be utilized to create climate consciousness in the classroom by taking into account the features of the case or climate change that this case highlights. First, it's about using the latest science. Now, in my research on climate change, I have realized that sometimes science, getting access to latest scientific data can be quite challenging, because most of the time, the up-to-date data is found across a wide range of avenues, and some of them are not readily available as well, even though research projects might be government funded, as I found out. So one is finding data, the most up-to-date, reliable, credible data. Your IPCC reports is a good starting point, but for national level, that can be a challenge. So being aware of that. Second, to consider the limitations in law and policy. Now, as law and policy is not designed to address climate change as a matter of urgency, but at a pace that takes into account that's of social and economic factors as well. Because we need to be realistic how our politicians work, right? They need to keep a balance between environmental sustainability and economic need as well. Because like Charles has just said, we need to have food security. And sometimes that means that, yes, we need to have some level of pollution as well. But we also have a responsibility not to forget that environment is also important. And the environment will support our future long term. So not considering law and policy in a vacuum, as there are other challenges as well. But regardless of the outcome of this case, so whether it is successful or not, this case has already had an impact in creating huge awareness across the globe, not just by basing actions on tort law, existing tort law, but exploring a new tort. So it is demonstrative that climate change litigation should not be limited to just testing existing grounds or testing grounds on existing law, but thinking outside the square to argue new types of law, because as the Supreme Court has stated, we have not dealt with something that is of a global phenomena of this scale, so we do need to be creative and think broadly in finding solutions as well. My fourth point is to consider how evidence based on custom can be presented during trials. From the Supreme Court case, it is evident that tikanga has been used to find legal solution, but custom-based evidence can be tricky because custom can differ from community to community. So finding suitable and qualified experts will be crucial. And that can be a real challenge. We had one case that was quite novel in New Zealand where we considered a Sharia-based marriage contract. The case has gone through the first set of litigation all the way from the family court to the High Court, Court of Appeal, Supreme Court. It went back to the High Court, it went to the Court of Appeal, back to the High Court, because we do not have access to good expert evidence. So it can be a real challenge when you're dealing with something like that. Fifth is to consider the appropriate remedy. Should the actions be successful, then Mr. Smith has sought injunction and declarations. Even if the Supreme Court is not able to grant an injunction, given that the companies are emitting within the legal framework in New Zealand, declaration is also an effective tool as it creates a public perception. And we saw that in New Zealand with the first national COVID lockdown, where the High Court declared that the first 9 days of the nationwide lockdown was illegal because the government did not have the statutory jurisdiction to declare the nationwide lockdown. So the government was subsequently very mindful that their subsequent actions regarding lockdown were actually legal. So that was an effective remedy. Now with the 7 companies, such a declaration might lead or force them to think within the concept of corporate social responsibility, because negative publicity may well present a business case for them to do just that. So regardless of the outcome of this case does raise awareness in terms of understanding the problem. It highlights opportunities for actions, certainly activisms by individuals and environmental groups or human rights groups, into finding legal solutions. So it's about exploring new grounds. Now, given the broadness of these topics, the Smith and Fonterra case can be utilized in the classrooms to create climate consciousness in a number of subjects. Now, this can be in entry-level papers such as we teach, where we talk about the basis of law and using the legal frameworks to address social and environmental problems. So we teach climate change to our first-year students and the challenges that come with it, and why we are not able to address climate change impact swiftly. Tort law is the obvious ones because all the actions are based on tort law. It can be taught in climate change or environmental law, which is another obvious area. This case explores civil procedure as well. So it talks about the principles that are related to strikeout applications. So you can use a civil procedure case to talk about this case. Fifth, evidence law. As I said, using custom-based experts and the challenges that come with it. So evidence is a difficult paper in our university, and this will add further challenges to it in this context. Human rights is another option. The seventh is indigenous and minority rights studies, as it does not matter that here we are considering aspects of Tikanga which are unique to Maori in New Zealand, but there might be comparable aspects in other jurisdictions where indigenous and minority cultures may have some aspects which are similar. And finally, the corporate entities under the theme of corporate social responsibility, because as I've said, there may well be some negative impact regardless of whether Mr. Smith or should Mr. Smith be unsuccessful in his claims. And just to give you an example, the beauty of this case, my colleague, Dr. Trevor Dyer Winterbottom, is presenting on exactly this case on Sunday, where he is looking at the social justice, equity, and climate change angle based on this case. And when I was coming over in India, I bumped into an old colleague of mine who was on her way to Adelaide in Australia, where she was exploring the influence of Tikanga on the expansion of common law, tort law. So there is a lot of things that we can do using this case in the classroom. Thank you very much. Should I leave? Dhanyawad. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Durga Sri Raman, for a very enlightening climate change consciousness in the classroom topic. Our next presenter is Mr. Peter Davis, and his topic is on community resilience and legal education amidst environmental challenges. Can I have Peter?
Good morning to everyone. I'm glad to be here. This is my second time in India, the first being last year. We are grateful for the hospitality, and definitely when we go back home, we'll have a good story to tell. So I am Dr. Peter Davis Mutesasira from Uganda. I don't know among the student community who has been to Uganda, but in case you want to get to Uganda, you can come through me. For now, I'm the gateway. So I serve as the Dean of the School of Law at Uganda Christian University. It was the first private university to be licensed by the government of Uganda. And I think we run the biggest law school in the country. So my presentation today will be about community resilience and legal education amidst environmental challenges. The previous speakers have already done some justice to this topic, so I'll not get into some details. But I'm also wondering why the ladies had to speak from that side and I'm speaking from this side. I don't know if there are some gender dynamics, but it's all good. So, for those, to give you a mental picture or an impression of what my university looks like, that would be on your right. That is the main gate. And here, this is the main administrative building. Previously, my university used to be a theological college before it became a university about 25 years ago. And this is the oldest building in the university. It's over 100 years old. So the Vice Chancellor sits in this building. It's called the Bishop Tucker Building. And it's over 100 years old. Named after Bishop Tucker, the missionary who came to set up this institution as a theological college, which is now a university. So, community resilience and legal education. Most of us who have come for this colloquium, we are into, I would call it business, what other word can I use? But our primary duties and obligations involve dispensing legal education. And this is the focus of my presentation. Beyond the ordinary teaching of law, beyond the ordinary dispensing of legal knowledge, including environmental law, how does legal education draw a link with the communities amidst environmental challenges? So climate change and pollution are still a significant challenge facing humankind, and countries in Africa, including Uganda, are no exception. As you know, climate change and environmental degradation are a global challenge, and they've worsened already existing inequalities amongst communities and even nations. For instance, things like drought, unemployment. On my arrival here, I was looking at the newspapers and I was seeing the rains. We used to study about them in geography. Are they the monsoon rains? I saw people, vehicles, buildings drowning in the waters. So these threats are real. Malnutrition, poverty, conflicts over land and borders, name it. And as earlier mentioned by my colleagues, these environmental challenges disproportionately affect certain segments of society, most especially those who are not even responsible or who are not even the cause of these problems. So according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, these challenges have majorly been attributed to human or anthropogenic activities. So, states have an international obligation to address environmental challenges, to combat climate change, and they've put in place institutional and legal mechanisms, but a lot more still needs to be done. NGOs have also tried to play their part, but with this presentation, I believe that legal education through eco-pedagogy has the ability to do more by dispensing knowledge that enhances community resilience amidst environmental challenges. Maybe briefly telling you about community resilience. Basically, the ability of the communities to withstand, to adapt, and also recover from the adversities of environmental challenges. In Africa, this is still a challenge, and I think it's within our settings. We tend to take long to adapt, to recover, or even move on from our challenges. At times, they tend to define who we are. At times, they become our identity. I don't know if we are looking for pity or that is how we are accustomed, but I believe legal education through eco-pedagogy will make the situation better. So, It's imperative to set a new agenda for legal education development that is influenced by the need to enhance community resilience amidst environmental challenges. So as people who teach the law, as people who dispense knowledge, we need to tailor what we teach to our students, because by the way, the students we teach go into the communities. So the students are the link between what we do and the communities. This is where they live, this is where they were born, and probably in life, when all is said and done, we retire back to where we came from. So the only way we can make a positive impact is through the legal education we dispense. And in basically discussing how legal education influences the need to enhance community resilience, this presentation seeks to answer the following. There are three. One, how does legal education deliver effective learning outcomes that enhance community resilience to environmental challenges? And two, how can legal education be changed or customized to promote sustainable development? And three, what kind of resilience should be encouraged by legal education to meet the future environmental demands of the communities? Maybe just to briefly mention something, when I was preparing this presentation, there are two cases that came to mind. This litigation one involved indigenous communities. These communities, for instance, in Uganda, we have the Benet and the Batwa. The Benet live in the eastern part of Uganda, the Batwa live in the western part. These communities have done a lot to conserve the environment. And when the government has given concessions and permits to people to do different things in ecologically sensitive areas, when those areas get exhausted, the government now tends to move to areas occupied by indigenous communities. And they've been forcefully evicted. They've been forced to adapt or to develop by force. These days I have colleagues who promote the notion of the right not to develop. It's my right to step backward. It's my right to live in a tree. So you cannot impose development on me. So these indigenous people have had to go to court. And the Constitutional Court has ruled that the Batwa, for instance, forcefully driving them out of their homes, destroying their property, subjecting them to all types of urbanization was a violation of their constitutional rights to property, to the environment, to livelihood, and the rest. And some of these matters have gone to court, and the government has argued that these people are responsible for environmental degradation. And the argument is, if they are responsible for environmental degradation, how come the areas in which they live are so conserved that they've now become enticing for the government and investors to descend on them? We also have another case that concerns smoking in public, where it was argued that subjecting to those of us who don't smoke to secondary smoke is a violation of our constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment. So both these cases, among others, show that community involvement with the leadership of NGOs and legal scholars has done a lot to enhance resilience to environmental challenges. So looking at legal education and delivering effective learning outcomes that enhance community resilience, one, legal education is an enabler of community resilience through knowledge dissemination. For instance, many of us teach environmental law, teach climate law, natural resources law, and the rest. And in my university, what we tend to do is we tend to send students out of the communities to try and interact with the communities, to try and determine what environmental challenges they face. And when they come back, they're supposed to write reports. Though over years, we've had students who have decided to go work with multinational corporations and then use the information we give them to basically enable these corporations to take advantage of the communities. But there are always exceptions to every rule. So legal education also enables practical skills development. For instance, we have environmental law moots and trial advocacy. We engage students in clinical legal education and community outreach. And also we encourage students to go do internships with local NGOs, community-based organizations, and also government ministries, departments, and agencies that deal with the environment. So legal education also enables the transition of skills acquired in the classroom to the field. Some of us at times get overwhelmed with the numbers of students we teach, though we try to follow up a few of our students to try and determine where they end up and what they are doing for the community and whether they are being good ambassadors of the institutions where they come from. In Uganda, we've had a challenge of transforming what students get from class and applying it in the field in a practical manner for the good of society at large. So, moving to how legal education can be changed or customized to promote sustainable development. One is strengthening training of trainers and capacity building. This is one of the challenges we face, for instance, in Uganda. If I sent you for 5 environmental lawyers who can train others, you may come back with only 2 or 3, and 2 of us are in this room. So, staff in tertiary institutions and universities need strengthening and capacity building by way of training of trainers. We also have allocating more resources, that is manpower and financial, towards legal education that focuses on pedagogy. I don't know about other universities, but in Uganda, environmental law is looked at as something that is low in return, especially commercially, but it does good for society. We also need to develop and review curricula on legal education to respond to environmental challenges. Legally in Uganda, for instance, we review curriculum or curricula every 5 years, but in 5 years, a lot happens. So we need to adopt uniform international and national criteria and norms and standards for legal education aimed at promoting community-led sustainable development. So through the IUCN Environmental Academy, maybe we can create some international and national synergies that will enable us achieve this. So looking at resilience of legal education enabling resilience to meet the future and environmental needs of communities. So legal education should be able to identify, diagnose, and devise interventions to address inequalities which may hinder community resilience. And legal education should be able to stimulate policy development and reform that will succeed in promoting community resilience. So through legal education and being legal scholars, whenever parliaments at the national or even local level councils are trying to develop policy and legislation, we should be the first point of call. Legal education should facilitate the mobilization of expertise across borders to exploit comparative advantages in the different areas, such as staff exchanges, teaching of split courses, and collaborations. And continuing with resilience, legal education should devise courses and curricula which raise awareness of inclusivity issues in a country-specific way with regard to vulnerable and marginalized persons such as indigenous communities. And lastly, legal education should identify and promote learning experiences that are relevant to community resilience through developing consensus on how to achieve this in a curricula and pedagogy. So as I conclude, can legal education deliver community resilience amidst environmental challenges? I think it can. For instance, legal education has the transformative potential to promote community resilience and sustainable development, as it has learning outcomes that equip communities with the ability to effectively participate in programs that will lead to better decision making. One of the things I now encourage people to do with the communities and my students is to engage them in what we'd call activism. But they have to take care not to engage in something that will lead to a protest and probably a riot. And these days we are taking advantage of online platforms to engage in online activism. So legal education has a special role in shifting focus from unsustainable patterns of consumption and dangerous depletion of natural resources by communities. In countries like Uganda, we survive on Mother Nature for survival: firewood, food, shelter, the list goes on and on. But unfortunately, those who are most affected think environmental conservation is something for the affluent, which isn't the case. So looking into the future, legal education has the ability to lead the transformation towards sustainable and resilient communities. And in a nutshell, community resilience amidst environmental challenges will be attained through a diversity of goals and targets, embedded in, for example, promotion of participatory rights, promotion of sustainable development, promotion of intergenerational equity. In Africa, we have a notion of, let me enjoy life, my grandchildren will take care of themselves. But with intergenerational equity, the situation is different. So the communities need to be enlightened, and it's legal education which can do this. And lastly, good governance. However much we teach, however much we try to make communities resilient, we must look at the ecosystem in which we are doing this. If you're in a country with poor governance, where there is corruption, no rule of law, where there is abuse of massive rights, you could face some challenges. This is all from me. Thank you very much.
Peter? Thank you, Peter, for your paper. Now, our next presenters are all online, and so we will have our next presenter, Jenny Hall, Professor Jenny Hall, Exploring Eco-Pedagogy and Intersectionality in Legal Education. And she will talk for 12 to 15 minutes, and I hope they keep in time. Hi, Jenny. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you well. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can see you, we can hear you.
Can you see the slideshow?
Not yet. Jenny, you have
sharing on my...
Jenny, you have 12 to 15 minutes, if that's okay? If you can finish in 12
That's
minutes.
perfect. It's sharing from my side. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, well, morning everybody. A very early and cold morning in Johannesburg, and I wish I was with you in Gujarat and with my colleagues. So in my paper, just as a brief overview, why pedagogy, eco-pedagogy, and previous colleagues have spoken about that, so I won't belabor the point or speak to it in too much detail. But the starting point really is that with the triple planetary crisis that we have and the era of the Anthropocene that we don't deny is with us at the moment, it makes it abundantly clear that if we want the current trajectory that we're on to change, we need to do something different. And that includes all walks of life. It's the way we approach economics, the way we approach science. And of course, that includes law as well, which in some cases entrenches or doesn't adequately address and hasn't adapted to the kind of systemic inequality that environmental issues such as climate change raise. And I think we saw that with the previous paper on DLIC. DLIC is struggling to keep up with current environmental crises and needing to reform itself. So what does that mean for us in the classroom? And it's quite a challenge, I think, or one that I've been wrestling with. And that's that our students need to navigate not only discussions on what the law is, but we need to prepare them for a lot of change and to become very skilled critical thinkers, which is something I think my colleague from Uganda was alluding to, is questioning the law itself, what it ought to be, what it will be in the future, and to be part of the generation that shapes a new approach to law generally. What this means for me is that the banking approaches that Paula Freire spoke about, where teachers stand in front of a class and pass information to students which they need to learn and absorb and then give back to us under assessment conditions, are not effective. We're not training them that way to be good thinkers. So, what are the implications of eco-pedagogy for us older fossils in the room, and how do we go about it? I suppose the starting point, and unfortunately there's not enough time to go through the literature, but is that underlying eco-pedagogical approaches is a belief that existing approaches are flawed. Systems are flawed, thinking is flawed, and they require transformation. And it stems from the sort of struggle, liberation, pedagogical approaches of great thinkers like Paula Freire, and builds on it, and I would argue is as relevant today. And what it does require of us is that we move into a really critical inquiry and move away from the teaching of environmental law, which historically has been a very safe, conservation, neutral kind of eco-literacy undertaking. The challenge that we face is that eco-pedagogy has philosophical underpinnings, and quite a lot has been written on it, but it's not a strict doctrine, and it doesn't have a fixed methodological technique that we can cut and paste and take into our classrooms and say, well, if we're doing that, we're on track, we've adopted this new approach. So in the paper that I'm giving, what I want to do is focus on sharing some piloting of approaches that I've been doing in my teaching, and welcome comments on that, because it's by no means a done project. And for me, underlying that also is that intersectionality, also alluded to by my colleague from Uganda, when we're talking about equity, gender issues, and so on. These all need to be emphasized in our teaching to environment and brought together so that we can create the meaning amongst students which will enable them to work with the teaching context. So, moving south, in my case, and sorry, I've got a screen right over my slides, which is why I keep hesitating. I'm trying to move it out the way. One of the modules I teach is a master's module in international environmental law, so something that many of us can resonate with. And we see a vast change in size, in class size numbers from the first years that I teach. I have a class of 500, which I'm responsible for. By the time I get to masters, we have a class size between 9 and 12. And there's certain themes in the profile of the students that we see. Most of them come from South Africa or other African countries. We have very few students from the global north. The vast majority of them come from financially disadvantaged backgrounds. They're not mother tongue English speakers, which makes it a challenge when engaging with the literature. They have also importantly come from a banking style education, which is a product of these large classes that we have in South Africa. So the opportunities for engagement and systemic meaning creation at the undergraduate level is more limited. And also in the context of the University of Johannesburg, they haven't had an undergraduate course in environmental law, so they're arriving green, pardon the pun. And now my screen has frozen. Right. So, as a general underlying approach that I go into, I do adopt Socrates' quote that I can't teach anything, I can only make people think. In the university context, of course, and with the businessization model that I think we're all subjected to, we do have primary outcomes that we've got to deliver because we have the constraints of a largely typical assessment type approach. But how I go about that is using a very dialectical problem-posing approach to each unit in the module, and also spending a lot of energy on making sure there's democratization of learning within the space of the classroom. And to give you some examples of how we go about that, and if you can just bear with me, there seems to be a delay on my screen side. Each unit does, of necessity, start off with what the law is and why it's there, so that we lay a foundational basis for students to start engaging. But what we do with each of the units also is that we follow it with a very interactive questioning dialectical approach in which there's quite an intersectional focus. So in my case, I pick different themes which straddle the entire module. The north-south dynamic is one that comes up, global equity and also local equity within our national context, realizing that South Africa is the most unequal society in the world. Not a statistic that we're proud of, but we have it. And then as examples, if I'm doing the lecture on biodiversity, for example, we'll take the students through the fundamental of the Convention of Biodiversity and the CITES Convention and so on. But then we'll have special lectures by internationally recognized experts challenging some of that thinking. So there'll be special lectures on how animal rights should feature. And that is one of the most exciting lectures actually in the module, because it's terribly uncomfortable for students, and they all start off saying, are you needing me to be a vegan, because that's not my culture. And of course it's not instructional lobbying kind of lecture. It's about getting students to think and to question their own approach and how they live their everyday life. Other examples, lectures are mostly conversational. Students are very much encouraged to talk, express freely, share their own views and their experiences. And what we do try and do is say, how does this relate to your everyday life? That's been a challenge for me, because I'm a different generation from my students, and I realize what's relevant to the activism that I did when I was younger has a very different emphasis for students now. So whereas we were worried about hazardous waste in the context of shipbreaking and examples like that, my students get more excited about waste in the context of fast fashion. And how we stimulate that conversation and democratization is, I have pop-in lecturers, so I have everyone from experts to activists, also to representatives of different sections of society. So I get someone to come in and speak about the relevance of environment in the context of Gen Z, for example, which typically goes down very well. The other thing we do is set up a WhatsApp group, and obviously there's some administrative information that gets exchanged there, but more importantly, it's a platform for students to engage. And the success of these vary each year, but some years students get terribly excited and they'll drop something and they're saying, did you see the news this morning? This has happened or that has happened, and they end up having a dialogue. And that's an aim for me, is that the conversation shifts from me directing and managing the conversation to students having the conversation amongst themselves, and in that way constructing meaning where they own the topic at a much deeper level. We've also changed the approach to assessment. So part of the assessment approach is that students have to engage in discussion activities. I will pose a question which prompts them to think on, do you think compliance and enforcement mechanisms in international conventions are effective, as one example. The first aim is to get students to do the readings, and getting students to do readings remains a challenge. I can't claim that we've conquered that. But what they also need to do is express very personal learning observations, and they're encouraged to be vulnerable in those spaces, to say, I never knew, or this one hit me hard, or I don't like it, I reject it. And what they also do once it's on a post-first basis, so they can't see other students' work, but once they have posted, they have to reply to another student's comment. And obviously we set rules in place, so that's done in a safe space context, and nothing is personal, unduly negative, but observations, and we try and encourage dialogue that way. This year, we're introducing another new feature where we'll have collaborative learning between students with my university and the University of the Western Cape, which is the other end of the country, and students typically have a very different profile there. And they'll be working interactively to come up with research output, but the idea again being creating that dialogue and creating their own meaning at the horizontal level. So some of the observations that I've had so far is that students take time to warm up to the approach. They feel very uncomfortable when we start this approach because they're used to a banking style system. And so in the first lecture particularly, they feel out of depth, they feel at sea, and they ask questions like, yes, but what's in the exam? How do I go about studying for this course? But by the end of the course, they've generally warmed up to the approach, and they quite like it, and they like the idea that they're able to speak in class and speak freely. The degree of uptake also varies from year to year. What I do find is in most years, because students have had no experience to environmental law, they enter the course with expectations that they're going to be learning very much conservation, hug-a-tree kind of approaches. And when they get into the harder issues around equality or inequality and gender issues and the intersectionality issues, they get a bit more excited and they see the relevance of environment in their everyday life. And as an example, in our WhatsApp groups, for example, I've got the comment on the right. They start posting things like they've become eco-warriors and they're reporting for duty. And they get very animated, and they'll tell me they're shopping somewhere and there's a recycling bin, or they've come across someone who's set up a worm bin, and they get excited about things like that. I have also had a lot of them contacting me in subsequent years saying how they've used the learnings and how it has expanded their thinking in other areas of law. Importantly for me is that the project as a teacher, of course, is never a finalized one, so it's placed quite a lot of pressure on me to keep updating my relevance and start getting in touch with TikTok and all sorts of social media platforms that historically I've shied away from. So when we're into climate change, for example, I see my children are very enamored with social influences. Yes.
So you've got to wrap up in a minute from now, if you can.
Nearly on last slide. So we'll start off with, for example, the Instagram picture of Kylie Jenner and her husband Travis. You know, should you take your plane or mine? And just say, but people are also shaming them, calling them climate criminals, and getting them to think about their social media interaction. Right. Just a last comment from my student, which I really enjoyed. Feedback that they so enjoyed also learning through videos and exploring videos and having dialogue around that. And I like to comment that she felt like she was someone who just binge watched a show which ended too quickly, and now she's looking for the new one. In this, one of the challenges I'm still wrestling with is the triple planetary crisis, of course, can be quite overwhelming when students really start creating meaning and understanding and going into it. And one has to be very sensitive about the degree of eco-anxiety that's created in the learning space and managing that. And that was a very rapid wrap-up, Shal, so I hope that timing was good. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Jenny, for a very thought-provoking topic that you just spoke about. And we now move on to two more presenters who are going to be presenting online. We have the next presenter, Jose Yuan, who is going to present on incorporating environmental perspective in legal studies. Are you there, Yuan? Jose, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Jose, you have 12 minutes. I would really appreciate if you keep it within time. We are running behind schedule.
Yeah, I apologize for being late because I am. Yeah. Oh, okay. Can I start or you tell me when?
Yeah, you can start and I'll tell you when you need to wrap up.
Okay. So I like to start by saying that in Mexico there are 3 important public universities. The most famous of them is the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM. The second is the National Polytechnic Institute. And the third is the Metropolitan Autonomous University. This is my university, and this is the institution I will talk about it this morning. The Metropolitan Autonomous University has 5 campuses. Let me tell you the names of the campus. Doesn't matter if you don't understand because it's very difficult. The campus are Azcapotzalco, Xochimilco, Coajimalpa, Iztapalapa, and Lerma. 5 campuses around the metropolitan area of the Mexico City. We have more or less 60,000 students in these campuses doing graduate and postgraduate studies, and the university was founded in 1974. Look at the date, just 2 days after the Stockholm meeting. And even when I can say that the framers of the programs of this new university taking into account the Stockholm Declaration, it's a curious coincidence that the university was created just 2 days after the Stockholm meeting. No? Let's say that since the very beginning, the law studies program at the Metropolitan Autonomous University was considered as one of the most innovative because at this university, the law is not studied in the way it is traditionally analyzed. Basically, I can say that in most of the universities around the world, the law studies are based in this idea of the summa divisio, the Roman idea of summa divisio. On one hand, you have the public law, and on the other hand, you have the private law. No. In my university, the structure of the law studies is different. Basically, I can say that the study of law is based in 2 ideas. First, private property has an environmental function. Second, economic development has to be sustainable. These 2 ideas are the fundamental pillars that support the organization of the law studies program in my university. In that context, it's not strange that the most important environmental lawyers in Mexico, the most important environmental scholars, no, and stakeholders have studied at the Metropolitan Autonomous University, and even when the program does not integrate specifically a subject matter such as environmental law, the environmental law is studied in almost all the areas that integrate the law studies program. No? Apart from that, in a more general context, I like to say that in these 50 years that my university has, it has integrated the sustainable perspective into the academic life of the university in at least 4 manners. Let me explain these 4 manners. First, let me list these 4 manners. First, the Metropolitan Autonomous University was the first Mexican university in offering a bachelor's in environmental engineering. In 1974, we were offering this innovative program for those interested in studying environmental engineering. Second, the Metropolitan Autonomous University has implemented several programs that made possible the environmental management of the 5 campuses. Third, in the last years, the Metropolitan Autonomous University has created new graduate and postgraduate programs. For instance, this year we start to offering a bachelor's degree in environmental sustainable projects. It's absolutely a multidisciplinary study because the students in this career have to know about the law, about politics, about engineering, about biology, etc. It's a very, very multidisciplinary perspective of this program. And finally, recently, this institution of higher education and research has adopted the goal that all the programs, all the academic programs at the university, doesn't matter the discipline, has to be structurally based in 2 pillars: gender consideration, and on the other hand, a sustainable paradigm. Let me talk a little bit more about these 4 points. First, as mentioned, in 1974, the Metropolitan Autonomous University was the first public university in offering the career of environmental engineer. This was really innovative in that time because remember, in 1972, the world started to consider the different paradigms of the environmental law and environmental degradation, and this response of the university to create a new bachelor degree in this specific topic was really innovative in that time. Second, as mentioned, my university has implemented several programs to guarantee a sustainable management of the university campus. No? And for instance, the council of the university recently approved the plan for sustainable development and climate change of the Metropolitan Autonomous University. This plan integrates 10 programs. Let me list just for your information. First, institutional coordination. Second, reduction of greenhouse gases from electricity and gas consumption. Third, reduction of greenhouse gases from university mobility. Fourth, sustainable management of water. 5. Integral management of solid waste. 6. Resilience infrastructure for risk reduction, disaster, and climate change adaptation. Next, management of green areas. Next, responsible consumption. Next, climate change, communication and divulgation. And finally, active participation of students. This is very important. The students are involved in all these programs, and this guarantee that we will have success in this idea. No? It's another way to see the issue we are analyzing today. In which way the university guarantees us that the management of the facilities at this university are ruled by the principle of sustainability. Third point, my university, as mentioned, has created new graduate and postgraduate environmental programs. We have a number of studies of master and PhD focused in environmental matters, and also we have this new licenciature, this new bachillerature in sustainable projects. Finally, let me talk a little bit about the gender and sustainable considerations. The Council of the University, who is the maximum organ, the maximum authority at the university, has decided that in the future, starting this year, in the future, all the academic programs at the university will have to be built on two fundamental pillars. One of them is gender considerations, which is very important and is not different or too different from the other one, the sustainability principle. At the moment, we can see more advances in this idea of gender considerations because we have a new plan in that regard, and the idea is that in the same way we advance in the idea of integrate the sustainable principle as a pillar of all the academic programs. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you wrap up? The time is close to.
Yeah, I will conclude just by saying that we have done too many things in that regard, but there is too much to do. The only that I can say is that we are committed with this idea. Sustainable has to be the principle that rules the legal education in my university. Thank you very much for your time. I will be happy answering your questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Wonderful presentation. Now we have another presenter, Bernadette Malunga, who is going to present to us on the strategies for online teaching of environmental law. Bernadette, are you around? Are you online?
Yes, I'm online.
Thank you. Can you start now, and I'll alert you when 12 minutes is up. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you.
You can start now, Bernadette.
Thank you, everyone. As it has been said, my name is Bernadette Malunga. I am from Malawi, and I teach on one of the environmental law courses, a master's course. So I just want to share some experiences. This is a joint course between Nairobi, Zimbabwe, and Malawi, and the teachings is mainly through online. It's online. So we have students from all those three countries. So I would want to discuss some of the challenges and opportunities of delivering an environmental law course across different African universities and using the course which we are teaching as an example. So we emphasize on the mode of delivery, the technological advances and reception, and the practicality of the lessons, and the student lecture participation. As we all know, online teaching is a method of education where the main elements include physical separation of the teachers and students during instruction, utilizing various technologies to facilitate communication and training. So it involves educating students on virtual platforms through live classes, video conferencing, webinars, and other tools. Its main advantage is that it connects the students from different backgrounds and perspectives and enabling them to learn in fully virtual settings using electronic mobile devices. And I can emphasize that relevance using the environmental master's course that we are offering, that the students that we have coming from different backgrounds or countries, they bring in these perspectives. It's not only for the student, the different perspectives and the different experiences happening in the three countries. Even the lecturers themselves, since they're also coming from the three countries, it enriches the discussion and the perspective that you get from the course. There are various theories on effective online teaching, and some of the theories can be useful when handling environmental course. I got to engage with the constructivism theory of learning, that it can be useful when delivering environmental online courses. This theory emphasizes on learners' active construction of knowledge through their interactions with the environment. And it suggests that the learners should construct knowledge through inquiry, reflection, and experimentation. And it also suggests that learners can achieve higher levels of learning with the help of more knowledgeable others. And coming to online learning, the constructivism theory can be applied by designing learning experiences that promote active engagement and reflection and collaboration. And I think that this is important for environmental courses, because my assumption is that when you're delivering an environmental law course, it needs to be as practical as possible so that the students or the learners can relate theory and practice. That would help them to be change makers in the society and not just get the theoretical perspective. That's why I think that the constructivism theory is more important when delivering on online environmental law courses. So it would be important to use online simulations and case studies which will allow the learners to explore the complex problems and develop critical thinking skills. That means that for lecturers or people who are delivering these courses, they have to be alive or alert to what is happening in the various countries, in the various communities. Even the students get the real practical examples and bring them to class and let the learners engage with that. That will allow a lot of simulation and also deeper understanding. Additionally, using that theory, it would enhance also online discussion forums and peer review activities. And since this is a course that is being taught and involving students from different countries, the learners will be able to peer review each other, what's happening in the countries, get the best practices, and also get what is working well and employ that in their own country or in their own environments. Of course, the constructivism theory is not without challenges. Some have criticized it for its focus on individual knowledge construction, which may not fully account for social and cultural dimensions of learning. And what are the methods that we use in online methods of teaching? The methods are generally divided into two: the asynchronous method and the synchronous method. What we are using in the master's course is the synchronous method. The synchronous method of online learning refers to a mode of education where instructors and students participate in real-time interactions despite being in different physical locations. And it involves various tools like live chats like WhatsApp, Facebook, Messenger, things like those. We're not using the live chats at the moment, but you can also have other methods like live online classes, which we are using, the video conferencing tools. So we mainly use Zoom and Google Meet. The other methods are the joint viewing of multimedia presentations and online slideshows, like PowerPoint presentations. That's what we mostly use. So as you are engaging with the students, you have your PowerPoint that they can see, not only for the teacher, but also for the learner, so that everybody is on the same stage. So this synchronous approach enhances understanding through the use of diverse media and supports the interactive learning. The challenges associated with the synchronous method. So, for example, some students might not be able to participate at the required time due to technical or scheduling problems, and we have noticed this delivering this course as well. Students, lecturers are having technical problems to join the classes or to continue with the classroom. It's also the other challenges. It's lack of flexibility because the learning group all needs to be present using whatever telecommunication technology which has been agreed upon. And that insistence on live sessions means the entire learning group has to engage at set times. But the observation is that some people are unavailable from among the members of the learning group. That presents a problem. What are the best practices on effective? Hello?
Yeah, Bernadette, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, all right. So let me just highlight some of the best practices that we can do. One, the students as well as the instructors must be familiar with the online technology. That is very good for the students and the instructors to be proficient with the technology. So they have to be familiarized with the online platforms, the tools, the functions, so that lessons shouldn't be interrupted. We still have this challenge. So, for example, of asking students to mute their mics, failing to upload lecturers or others failing to access the uploaded lecturers. So we have to work on that. So we need proper training and support that should be provided to address the difficulties that people are engaging. This can also be mitigated by recording live sessions for later viewing. So that would ensure accessibility for all students. We haven't started doing that, recording the live sessions so that if students have technological challenges, they can access it later. also promoting active engagement. Sometimes you think you are in class together when the other students are busy doing something at home because you're not there with the student. Some will just log in and go and do other things. So active engagement becomes something that is essential, and more importantly, establishing clear communication guidelines that enhance the learning experience at the start of the lessons. I think I should stop there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernadette. Now we have one more presenter who has just come online, and therefore we're going to allow him to speak. So we have next is Mimbano Mawesu. I apologize because I really don't know how to pronounce your name. Are you online? Limazel?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
So you're presenting on the topic fostering environmental justice through eco-pedagogy. You have 12 minutes, and I will remind you at that once 10 minutes is up. Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine.
All right, you can start now.
All right. I'm trying to share, but having problems, but I'll continue speaking and hopefully get to share at some point. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nzimezile Mweso. Indeed, my name is difficult. I'm from the University of Malawi, and like the last presenter, we are in the same program, and we are implementing eco-pedagogy in a master's program on women, children, and nature's rights, mental governance. I'll start my presentation by looking generally at how eco-pedagogy can be used and utilized for okay, I can't share, I think. I'm not sure what's happening and what you're able to see, but from my end, it's all mumbled jumbled up here, but I hope you can hear me. So, as I was saying, I will look at how to use eco-pedagogy as a tool for justice, and I'll look at women, children, and nature's rights, and look at our program that we have and how we have tried to utilize it. And as a beginning, we all know that eco-pedagogy, as the others have spoken, has emanated from a realization of the limitations that are there in the environmental education, but also mostly because of the worry of human and the relationship that it has with the natural world, especially the bringing into consciousness, planetary consciousness, so that we can resolve the conflict that is there, the balance between the human development, but also the planetary boundaries being taken into account. And so, as a tool, it has, at essence, a leaning towards promoting sustainable living and ethical interactions with the natural world. And this is done by integrating ecological and environmental awareness and also social justice principles. It's very critical of the traditional environmental education as more humanistic than ecocentric. And one of its strong points is that it recognizes the interconnectedness of humans, of nature, and the environment, which is something that I think we've moved on to realize at the global level as well, in trying to make sure that we address the planetary crisis, like, for example, the triple planetary crisis. And that's the key concept for eco-pedagogy that I want to zoom in on, are concepts about interactive, integrative thinking, and that this basically encourages the learners to connect legal principles with ecological context, promoting a holistic understanding by bridging legal doctrines and environmental realities a move away from doctrinal approaches and methodologies to social legal approaches that ensure that we're taking into account the realities where we are and what is happening. And then there is the eco-literacy, the concept involving developing environmental literacy among legal students, and therefore emphasizing an understanding of the ecological systems, interdependency, and the impact of legal decisions on the environment. Another aspect is the critical reflection, and this again tries to ensure that students, through the eco-pedagogy, that they critically examine the assumptions underlying legal norms, challenging the anthropocentric perspectives, and also encouraging and questioning the role of the law in the planetary ecologies. And then there is the practice, where you emphasize the practical actions alongside the theoretical knowledge, where you are ensuring that the students have empowerment through the legal knowledge that would be able to address the injustices that are there. And finally is ensuring that there are social justice issues of equity, sharing the burden, sharing the benefits, and making sure that communities that are most affected by decisions are able to participate in decisions, but also that decisions and outcomes take into account the impact they have on the ecosystem. Now, why women, children, and nature? So the program that I'll speak to it just a little bit identified that if you look at the impacts and if you look at the problems what we have in the environment, there is poverty, food insecurity, and malnutrition that affect mostly women and children. And then we have the underrepresentation of women in natural resources and climate change. Children themselves and their rights are neglected, especially the right to be heard at all levels, international, national, local, but in all decision processes, to recognize them as an entity that needs is separate and needs to be recognized, and their needs and their interests as well. That has come up a lot because now children are taking up cases. And then the nature status as a subject of international human rights, and just recognizing that nature itself now needs to be separately accorded the respect and consideration, because ultimately we are connected and it cannot just be utility-based, but also that it must thrive. And I'll not speak much of the triple planetary crisis. We all know how it has impacted nature, it has impacted children, it has impacted women, because climate change, especially for us in Africa, where we have the cyclones and disasters that are happening in recent times, yet we're least prepared in making sure that we adapt and mitigate those effects. And so we have chosen triple planetary crisis as a basis, as the globalized crisis that we use in the teaching to make sure that we take into context what is happening. So the women, children, and nature's rights in environmental governance is a course that is done in partnership with 4 universities, the University of Malawi, University of Zimbabwe, University of Nairobi, and University of Oslo. And it's a master's program that is centered on making sure that there's contribution to change, and this is change through governance and society, whereby legal knowledge and research through social legal methodologies will help to bring about identify the necessary conditions for change. It's about change in capacity, but it's also based on trying to reorient environmental governance from anthropocentric, androcentric perspectives to an inclusive, engendered, ethical, and moral approach towards nature. and that is done by situating women, children, and nature at the center of environmental governance while addressing the triple planetary crisis, so climate change, pollution, and diversity. The program uses ecopedagogy, using ecopedagogy through curriculum design and integration, first by promoting environmental awareness and literacy. So the content itself has taken a philosophy of greening, engendering, decolonizing through an interdisciplinary, multifaceted, multi-level, intersectional, empirical, legal cross-cutting approach, where we're infusing legal knowledge on women's rights, children's rights, and nature's rights with natural resources law and climate change law. It's centered on a grounded approach, which looks at what is happening on the ground and critiquing it to make sure that we solve the problems that are there. So it encourages critical thinking and problem solving by making sure that the domestic context and the experiences of the students, because of the target group that we have, are incorporated in making sure that through the different modules, it always goes back to what is happening, what are the issues around that module within the context of the students, and making sure that within the context of the countries that are in the program is reflected in the modules. Again, there is the critical pedagogy and the reflective practice by empowering active participation and agency. As my colleague spoke, there's a lot of interaction in the classroom. The understanding is that it's a two-way. The students have knowledge, the lecturers have knowledge, and so there's a lot of opportunity for them, both the students and the lecturers, to teach, because although it's an online program, the delivery is so much emphasizing on group presentation and group discussions, so much that I think... Yes, please.
Can you wrap up? I think you're already exceeding time.
All right. And then there's a lot of discussion and a lot of interaction so that there is a fostering of interdisciplinary learning, because although it's based in the Faculty of Law, it's not targeted only legal students, it's also targeted from other disciplines. And then there is also the use of technology that was already explained. I'll wrap up by looking at the barriers that we try to overcome. So the implementation challenges, that we move towards making sure that we're teaching and learning for professional development and not just for advocacy. Most of the students are passionate, and most of the lecturers, we have lecturers coming from different disciplines are also passionate, and we have experiences that are coming in. But now to make sure that there's that balance between making sure that they get the right legal skills that they can use even in the interdisciplinary, but also move towards making sure that the academic rigor and everything that is required is met. It's something of a challenge sometimes, because coming from different backgrounds and coming from different experiences, sometimes just the experiences themselves are so satisfying that to interrogate further and make sure that the presentations and everything like that sometimes is overlooked. And then we also have the resource intensiveness of the module, of the program, because we're using an online and making sure that they're always going back to their context. It means they have to have the resources, but we also have to have the resources online to make sure that we can facilitate and implement this. And this is not always an issue. And one of the last challenge that I can highlight is the assessment difficulty, to ensure that the different experts that are in the program can meet and assess candidates using one kind of standard, but also taking into account the multidisciplinariness of the module. For the law lecturers, it's difficult having students presenting a case, for example, without looking at the standard formulation of how you present a case and how you summarize a case. But then because it's an interdisciplinary one, that to be aware of those changes and the difficulties and the conflicts that may be there because of enforcing legal standards towards, for example, non-legal scholars is also something of a challenge. All in all, I can say that it has really brought out a lot of discussions of the realities from the different countries, but also a lot of opportunities for networking and doing something, and both the students and the lecturers working together in identifying problems and also researching around solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. So as we now come to the end of our workshop, we have heard from 8 presenters on various topics. And it just shows how this focus of eco-pedagogy is becoming increasingly important. Now, as we can see today from the 8 presenters, eco-pedagogy can be implemented, can be explored in many ways. Now, I want to thank each one of the presenters for their participations today. And today has been a journey of shared learning and insightful discussions and exchange of ideas. Looking ahead, today's discussion are just the beginning for us. The knowledge and insight that we heard today will undoubtedly inspire new approaches and initiatives. And I would take this opportunity once again to extend my heartfelt thanks to all presenters for their informative and thought-provoking contributions. We have heard from 8. We had initially had more than 8 people. We selected the best 8, so they presented today for us. And I also want to give a special thanks to our organizing team, the GLU team and Karnavati University, for their hard work and dedication in making this workshop a success for us. And I want to thank all those students who are running in the back to make this event. It's amazing to see these students work in collaborations with everybody. So that's a big thank you for them. And for those participants who are there watching us and listening to us, a big thank you for your patience as well. As we conclude, I encourage all of you to stay connected and continue this conversation and that has just started today with us. Let's collaborate and support each other in integrating ecological perspective into legal education and practice. Our efforts today have planted the seeds for a transformative approach to a legal education. Thank you all for these times. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was indeed a wonderful session. I may now request everyone to stand up for the national anthem. Now we'll proceed for lunch, and at sharp 12:45 we'll be assembling here for the group photograph.